great. I'm not assuming that everybody knows everybody. So I'm going to read the bios for both authors, just in case you can gather a new tidbit or two. If you don't know me, I'm Alice Hutchinson and I own the place. And Stephen is my son and Isabel is our new employee from the high school in Bethel. Yay. Jennifer Thermes is a map illustrator and award-winning author and illustrator of many books for children. Her nonfiction picture book, Manhattan, Mapping the Story of an Island, received 5-star reviews and was an NCTE Orbis Pictus Honor Book, a Junior Library Guild selection, and a Bank Street College of Education Best Children's Book of the Year. Jennifer weaves maps throughout her stories in order to give readers a sense of geography and place. She is fascinated by the big picture of history and how it connects the past with our lives today. She lives in Connecticut. It's pointed anyway. Karen Romano Young is a writer, illustrator, science communicator, and polar explorer. She has written more than 24 books for children and has illustrated several, including the groundbreaking graphic novel Doodlebug and the forthcoming graphic nonfiction Diving for Deep Sea Dragons. Her acclaimed science books include Try This, Mission Turtle Sea Turtle Rescue, and Shark Quest. She is the creator of science comic called Antarctic Log, which took her to Palmer Station, Antarctica, and a veteran of 7 ocean science research voyages, including dives to the bottom of the ocean. Karen's novels include 100% and A Girl, a Raccoon, and the Midnight Moon. Karen lives in Connecticut woods with her husband and big furry dog, Eleanor. Thank you, ladies.
Want me to introduce? I love it.
Sure.
So here's Jennifer reading her.
Shall I read it first?
Your beautiful book.
Oh,
Yes.
I'll read, yeah, that's the best way to explain comment. Excuse my back. I need to wear glasses for this.
And I'll show the pictures about that.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's really good.
Karen, you're standing right in front of the recording.
So there's a so this makes it really easy. So this is the Indestructible Tom Crean. And the prologue. Sorry. At the turn of the 20th century, Antarctica is the last unexplored continent on Earth. This time period is known as the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. In England, the Royal Geographical Society, private investors, commercial companies, and the Royal Navy support expeditions to the southernmost place in the world. The ice is unforgiving. It can break the human spirit. It takes many men willing to face hardship, danger, and years away from home, doing jobs both big and small to keep these expeditions running. This is the story of one. His name is Tom Crean. Tom Crean is born on the Finger of a Peninsula on a patchwork island that points toward the wild and windy ocean. But there's not much future for a poor lad from a large farm family on the west coast of Ireland. As so many of his countrymen have done for ages, young Tom will take to the sea. Tom joins the British Royal Navy. He is barely 16 years old. He takes his knocks and learns the ropes and works his way up the ranks. He likely thinks often of home. 10 years pass. Tom is at port in New Zealand. The ship Discovery is ready to leave for Antarctica, the frozen, uncharted end of the Earth. But a sailor has left the crew and Captain Scott needs a replacement fast. Tom steps up to the adventure. The Discovery. The goal is to explore Antarctica and make scientific discoveries. Tom and the men build a camp at Hut Point. For 10 hours a day, they haul 800-pound sleds to lay supply depots on a route along the ice shelf so that returning explorers can travel light and will have food and fuel on their way back to camp. The men know little of the ice's full trickery. Tom learns quickly. He sees the slushy floes that split and melt into the sea. He warms the frozen feet of a crewmate purple with frostbite. He fears the head and crevasses that plunge to a deep dark end, and yet the ice takes his breath away. Winter comes quickly to Antarctica. The sea closes in. The Discovery is locked in the frozen McMurdo Sound. The dark winter days and nights last from April through October. Explorations continue, but the ship stays trapped for 2 years. The Royal Navy sends rescue. It is a terrible thing to abandon a ship, but Captain Scott might have no choice. Tom and the men chop channels through the thick blocks of ice and blast them with dynamite. Tom crashes twice through the surface to the bitter sea below. His mates pull him out, soaked to the bone and freezing. Tom is lucky. Finally, the ice begins to thaw and the ship breaks free. The Discovery sails for home. Tom has earned a promotion for his good work. In 6 years' time, Captain Scott will invite him to Antarctica again. Now the Terra Nova. The goal is to be the first to reach the South Pole. The Terra Nova's deck teems with ponies, dogs, new motor sleds for crossing the ice, and one rabbit that Tom has brought aboard the ship. But as they leave port, Captain Scott learns that Roald Amundsen on the Norwegian ship Crean is also trying to reach the South Pole. They must hurry. A gale force wind blows hard as they set sail. It sweeps one dog overboard and washes him back on deck again. Tom is surely relieved. Tom and the men build a hut at Cape Evans to stay the winter. Once more, they make trips across the ice to prepare supplies for the long trek to the pole. Sometimes they use the dogs and ponies to pull the sleds, but the ponies are not fit for Antarctica, and Captain Scott is not used to handling sled dogs. The men must work even harder. On one return trip, crack, the ice splits beneath their tent. Tom and his crewmates jump from floe to floe and try not to slip into the sea. Killer whales circle and bump and knock against the bobbing ice. Hours pass. Finally, the men drift toward the ice shelf. Tom leaps across a span of water, scrambles up the slippery cliff, and runs for help. The men are saved, but one sled and 3 of the ponies are gone. For a short time after, Tom is snowblind from the sun's bright reflection on the ice. It is finally time to set out for the South Pole. The motor sleds freeze and break down almost right away. The ponies lose their footing and sink deep beneath the snow. Teams of men and sled dogs are sent back to camp. A blizzard blasts across the endless white expanse, and the men are forced to stop and wait. They have been marching for 10 weeks. Soon, there's not enough food for the animals. Tom must say goodbye to Bones, his favorite pony. And then, 150 miles from the South Pole, Captain Scott chooses 4 men for the last part of the journey. Tom is not among them. Tom Crean, Bill Lashley, and Lieutenant Teddy Evans must return to base camp as fast as they can before starvation and exhaustion overtake them. Evans gets sicker by the day with scurvy, which ravages a body in need of vitamin C. Tom and Lashley pull him on the sled. The men are tired. Evans begs to be left behind. Tom and Lashley refuse. Tom will go for help. It is 35 miles across the ice shelf to the nearest hut. The cold bites Tom to his core. He has only a few biscuits and a bar of chocolate to eat. He must keep going. Tom is completely alone. Snow swoops in behind him. Thomas found the hut just in time. 18 hours have passed. When the weather clears, Evans and Lashley will be brought back by dog sled. Tom Crean has saved their lives. Later, Tom will smile and thank his long legs for carrying him across the ice shelf. But for now, the men must wait the winter out at Cape Evans and hope that Captain Scott and the others will return from the pole. They never come. In spring, Tom and the search party find Captain Scott's tent. Scott and 2 of the men are frozen solid inside. His diary tells of their terrible ordeal. They had reached the South Pole after the Norwegians and perished on the return trip. The loss is almost too much for Tom to bear. When he returns to England, Tom will be awarded the Albert Medal for his bravery. 1 year later, Captain Ernest Shackleton will ask Tom to join a new expedition. Tom Crean will return to the ice. We have the Endurance. And the goal of the Endurance was to cross the entire continent of Antarctica. It is August 1914. The Endurance departs with 69 dogs, 28 men, and 1 ship's cat on board. The whalers on South Georgia Island warn Captain Shackleton that the ice is dangerously thick this year. Shackleton ignores them. Within weeks, they are trapped in the Weddell Sea. Winter is coming. There's no radio. No one in the world knows where they are. Captain Shackleton says the pack ice will thaw come spring. The ice appears motionless, but currents deep below the crust swirl and push the Endurance far off course. Tom and the men wait. They play soccer on the ice and hold Antarctic derby races to exercise the dogs. A surprise! Tom's dog Sally has 4 new pups. Tom names them Roger, Toby, Nell, and Nelson. He builds them a dog loo out of snow. Winter comes again. Inside, the ship is cozy. The Endurance is stocked with tea, biscuits, and plenty of canned food. The men melt ice for fresh water, and catch seals and penguins to eat for a change. Tom mends gear and cares for the animals. The men read, write, play games, and even shave their heads one day for fun. But the ship has drifted more than 1,000 miles. Ice wedges against its sides. The strong wood timbers begin to pop and squeal. The Endurance is being crushed. They must abandon ship. 28 men move 3 lifeboats, tents, skis, food, and dogs to the ice. The ice shifts and they move camp again. They watch as the ice slowly swallows the Endurance. Land comes within view, but the men can barely drag the boats to reach it. They are floating north toward open sea. The ice is only 6 feet thick. Maybe they will never get off. They cannot care for the dogs any longer. The ice can break your heart. There is no time to lose. The men launch the 3 boats into the frigid water. The James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the smallest, the Stancomb Wills, with Tom Crean at the helm. They aim toward Elephant Island. For 7 long days, they sail, row, and slip carefully between icebergs. The men set foot on the desolate beach. It is their first time on solid ground in over a year, but Elephant Island is far from any shipping lanes. No one will ever find them. There is only one choice. They must sail with the ocean currents across the most violent seas on Earth for help. The strongest whaling station on South Georgia Island is 800 miles away. Captain Shackleton chooses 5 crew members who are strong enough to make the trip. Tom Crean is one. The James Caird is only 23 feet long. The men fit it with a stronger mast, canvas sails, and planking salvaged from the other 2 boats. They pack the hull tight with stones from the beach for ballast to hold steady in the howling winds. If they miss this tiny spot on the globe, they will be blown out to the vast Atlantic Ocean, and all 28 men will be lost. They point toward South Georgia and set sail. Daylight, moonlight, stormy seas, ocean swells, seasickness, soggy, spray-soaked clothes. The men chip away at ice that freezes thick on deck and threatens to sink them. Frozen hands and frostbit feet, salt water sloshing, rotting reindeer skin sleeping bags, fitful sleep and hungry talk of lavish meals. Tom balances a small stove fueled by seal blubber and cooks hot hoosh to drink quickly before it spills. They navigate by wit and pencil. They take turns at the tiller. They hope their aim is true. When it is Tom's turn to steer the tiny vessel, he sings quiet songs to himself. No one knows the words but Tom. Suddenly, whoosh. The James Caird stays afloat, but their barrel of fresh water is now brackish with salt. The men become desperately thirsty. They have been at sea for more than 2 weeks. And then a sign of land, but from nowhere, a storm races in and they are blown back to sea for another day and night. Finally, closer, closer, and a surge of heavy surf carries them past jagged rocks safely to shore. They have made it to South Georgia. The men find a cave for shelter and sleep. In the night, wind and waves rip the James Caird from its mooring. Tom jumps in water up to his neck to save the boat, but the rudder has broken away. The whaling station is on the other side of the island. Knife-sharp mountains tower between the men and help. Now they cannot steer the boat, and it is too far to row. Ernest Shackleton, Frank Worsley, and Tom Crean will cross the glacial range by foot. It has never been done before. The men set out by moonlight. They carry 3 days' worth of food, a stove, and a carpenter's adze to use as an ice pick. They nail screws from the James Caird into their soft leather boots to grip the ice. They are linked together by rope. The cold is relentless. The men stop only to drink a hot meal. If they sleep for long, they will not wake. They must keep going. Climb up, race down. One day passes, night falls again. They try to find the right direction. They do not have a map. The men must backtrack one more time, and then another. Finally, they hear the morning whistle at Stromness. Toot. The three men are unrecognizable. They have not had a bath in months, but they have crossed the mountains of South Georgia in 36 hours. They have done the impossible. The whalers at Stromness Station send a ship for the men waiting on the other side of the island. And 4 months and several tries later, the men on Elephant Island are finally rescued. Tom Crean and Captain Shackleton are in the boat that fetches them from shore. All 28 crew members of the Endurance have survived. After the Endurance, Tom serves in the Navy for several more years. He retires and returns to his beloved Irish home. Tom never says a word about his Antarctic adventures, but his crewmates will remember the incredible life-saving feats he performed fearlessly during his time on the ice. They will say that Tom Crean was as nearly indestructible as any man could be. With more information.
Show the end papers. The Indian papers in the back. One's in the front, the big map.
I can show you the salt.
Is that what it is? I wanted to ask you.
So you make a big wash of watercolor paper, and then before it dries completely, you sprinkle salt on it. Very dry, you have to try this.
Yeah.
And it's very
All the
free.
illustrators are starting to go, ooh.
Yeah, so, well, you can't be a perfectionist, you just have to go with it.
So you get the paper wet with watercolor, so while it's still wet, you put the salt on, any kind of salt,
Table salt.
and it just forms these crystals?
Yeah.
So then what? Did you scan it or something? You get salt all over your scanner? I mean, how did you?
Well, you wait until it's completely dry, so overnight, and then you sort of brush off the excess salt, and that's it. They scanned it from there. It's really fun.
That's so cool.
It's fun. You have to play with the different ratios of water and color.
And
salt.
it looks like you did some stripes of color.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
That's really
It's
cool.
going for ice and water and.
What's that award? The underwear award or something that?
Oh,
Do you know what I'm
the
talking
undies.
about?
The undies.
The undies.
Yeah.
It's an award that you get for what your case art is that nobody sees unless they take off the dust jacket.
Oh, yeah. Always take off the dust jacket.
Yeah.
That's like secret
That's so
surprises.
cool.
That's really fun. I really want to do it. Yes. Well, I want to ask, because you were trying to tell me, but wait, how you got the idea to do Tom Crean?
So this is a fun story. I was having lunch with my editor in the city and pitching her a bunch of ideas, and I wanted to do an Antarctica story because I love maps and stories about a place, and I wanted to do a story about the race between Scott and Amundsen and see how that would work out. And she, the visual, she stopped me mid-sentence pulled out her phone and pulled up this picture of Tom Crean
Yeah.
on a bottle of,
Show it all around.
yes, on a bottle of Endurance Pale Ale, which was a beer at the time. And she's not a big beer drinker, but she had found this bottle and she was fascinated
Yeah.
by him, and she kept it in her office and yeah, was just like obsessed with this guy. And so I was like, okay, that's nice, you know. But so I went home and I started researching just to, you know, for the book, and I discovered that Tom was on all three of these
Yes.
of the major voyages. So it was like, that's the perfect tie-in to tell the story of exploration and Antarctica and Tom's story as well. Because he, you know, he was not highly literate like many of the other members of the crew.
Right.
So he didn't write a whole lot. More was written about him than he wrote himself. So it was, yeah,
You're
trying
here
to
for this?
combine
You're here for this?
his story and Antarctica.
Yeah. Well, why did you want to tell a story about Antarctica in the first place? And what was the attraction to all these explorers and all these expeditions?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of my books are, I mean, I'm a map illustrator, so I like
Yeah.
the idea of place, and I'm like an armchair traveler, completely armchair. I don't know who gets and goes for real. But so yeah, it just seemed like a fascinating area that I didn't really know about. And sometimes I
Yes.
find like the stories that I'm drawn to, it's a lot of it is like, oh, I'm curious about this and I want to learn more for myself. So
Yeah.
the idea of like how to incorporate Antarctica into the story, and then it just sort of came together. But it also gelled for probably 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
That's, yeah, we probably talked about it first in 2014 or 2015 because yeah, it just took that long and things were rescheduled, and then she left for another publisher and ended up taking the book with her. So, you know, publishing is funny like that, but it was actually good because it gave me a lot of thinking time into how to best tell his story.
Yeah. Well, he is an interesting person. This is a time frame that they call the historic age of heroic exploration. Is that what it is?
Heroic age of Antarctic exploration.
So this guy, and what do you say makes him a hero? And why did your editor, you know, want to?
Well, I think because he was, the photographs of him were very iconic, and there are a lot of pictures of him with his puppies. If you go online, there are a lot of pictures of him. But he was like a cog in the wheel. You know, that you hear about the big names that made these expeditions run, but there were so many people involved in making them work, and he was really, you know, not as well. His name was never as well known. I mean, I think when you know, when Scott died, that sort of overshadowed his heroic trek across the ice. So he didn't really get as much name recognition. And he didn't go on, unlike many of the other explorers. They went on to write books and they went on to lecture and went on, you know, tours talking about it. And he didn't do that. He was just very, very, very modest and quiet, and by all accounts, just strong physically, but strong mentally too. And I really love the idea that he was heroic and just sort of selfless and didn't give up. And I mean, what choice did he have? He could have just said, well, we're just going to freeze, but he made the trek.
Well, he's bigger than everybody else too, right? Wasn't he actually a man of stature?
Yeah. He was physically larger and physically strong. I think I read he pulled more sled weight than any of the other men.
Yeah.
I read that somewhere along the way, but
yeah, you
But
show
yeah,
him doing that. You know, he's like the only one who's tied up with the horses,
Right,
the
right.
dogs, right?
I mean,
Well,
they
I
all,
guess they are.
they all
They are,
did, but
yeah.
but he put a lot of hours on the ice pulling sleds.
Mhm.
So it was like this idea of, you know, his personal heroic story, but also he was a team player. You know, he worked as part of a team, and he kept the men's spirits up because,
Yeah.
you know.
I don't think I realized that he was in one of the ones that found Scott.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And just to be clear, frozen and dead in his tent.
right.
Because he didn't make it back. They got to the South Pole after Amundsen. Amundsen had left a note there for them. Yes, sad, right? And they
Oh, no.
yes. I mean, they were in this big race and they got there like not that much longer after them.
Right.
And then they didn't make it back. They didn't have the same street smarts, I guess, whatever.
Yeah, that, I
Their
mean,
skills weren't as good, and they were kind of frozen in their time. Like Crean, of course.
right.
But it's like I've read the Shackleton story, and there's things that I want. My questions are about, oh my gosh, why did you pick this, or why did you pick that? Because I know that Shackleton starts off with the ship with the 28 men, and then goes off to Elephant Island when the ship goes down.
Mhm.
And then of all the people that he could pick to go with him 800 miles to South Georgia,
Mhm.
Frank Worsley, who's known for being a great navigator,
Mhm.
himself, Shackleton, who was like, I'm not going to put anybody else in this position, but also Tom Crean.
Mhm.
And we're like, why? What was it about, in that situation,
I think,
those three guys?
well, I mean, they had been on a couple of journeys already together, and so he knew that he was a reliable person. He wasn't, I mean, a lot of men had mental breakdowns because
Yes.
it was such pressure,
Yeah.
and Tom never did. He just kept going, and so
Yeah.
I think he wanted somebody who just, he knew could hold things together, and he
Yeah.
apparently had quite a raucous sense of humor too, and maybe not appropriate for children, but like, he kept
Yeah.
the men's spirits up.
Mhm.
So yeah, physical strength, but also mental fortitude as well. And sometimes you gotta laugh too when you're in these dire situations, because what other choice do you have? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I know they used to take people with them. If they would ask them when they interviewed them, you play an instrument, or are you an actor, or anything like that? Did he have anything like that, or was it just tell really
Yeah.
great jokes? Or
No, he didn't. I mean, I think he told great jokes, but he didn't set out to be an explorer. It just sort of happened
Mhm.
happenstance. I mean, he left Ireland as a kid and signed up like right before he turned 16. So
Yeah.
he kind of fudged his age. But at this time in history, it was like, I think 30 years after the Great Famine, and there was a lot of poverty in Ireland. So
Mhm.
really one of the only choices for him in a big, huge family was to go off to sea.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just sort of luck and timing. He happened to be in New Zealand when somebody
Right.
jumped ship and they needed a
Yeah.
replacement, and he was like, okay, let's try it. And so it's not like he set out, that was one of his goals. He was a British Royal Navy member for his career,
Yeah.
and went back to that in between these Antarctic expeditions too.
Yeah.
So a little luck and timing involved. Sometimes in life you just find yourself like, hey, you're doing this thing, and how'd you get here?
Yeah. Well, he was always seemed like he was willing. Do we have those words at all? You said you didn't write like the others did, but did anybody ever like write down anything he said?
Not really. I mean, you can find interviews with his daughter and mother, Helen. And yeah, so no, he didn't keep journals. I mean, he barely finished school, so he was not well written. But in a lot of the other writings, people talk about him as strong, and his sense of humor, and so that was one of the challenges of this book, was that there, and why I wanted to sort of expand it too about all of the expeditions also, because he didn't write that much personally. So it is kind of, as a nonfiction author, you have to be careful not to attribute any intention to him or thoughts to him that he might not have had himself. But
Yes.
there's so many pictures of him with the animals, and they said he loved animals, and he cared for them. You see these pictures and they're heartbreaking when you know what happens.
Yeah.
But so you could surmise that he was really touched by that.
Well, you do such a beautiful job in the book of showing the emotions. I mean, he was right there for the fear, he was right there for the death, he was right there for the awful decisions that had to be made. Particularly, I'm sure they asked him about the animals.
Yeah.
Do you think we can do this now, Tom? That that kind of thing. And I'm sure that he was involved in it and being kind about it and everything like that. And then you have this wonderful page where he just, just goes off. Where is it? Where they, you just say so carefully, they had to make the decision that they couldn't keep the ponies and the dogs anymore.
Yeah.
And then you just see him and he's walked off his tiny little figure down the line by himself. You just knew he cried.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really love that moment. I love a lot of the things that you did with your layout
Thank you.
and things. And I want to ask you first about another aspect of the story that really blew me away. And that's this picture,
Yes.
right? I mean, I've read the Shackleton stories and I've read about the scene where they were crossing the thin ice and the orca were under the ice. I never envisioned it like this. Did you go through a few iterations? I mean, this is just horrifying and wonderful.
Yeah.
If I was a kid, I would just sit and
Yeah.
stare at this page and look at everything that's going on. I hope you guys can see it back there, this orca page.
I mean, there are not photographs of this.
No.
So, yeah,
Right.
you have to use a little bit of imagination and how terrifying it would be, but just from descriptions of it. And I think they were stuck like that for maybe 9 hours. So it was 9 hours of, am I gonna get off this
Wow.
bobbing ice floe and be eaten alive or
And
what?
yeah, those guys just like their big black fins going.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
goodness. Yes.
So that was one of the things that was, just in terms of putting the book together, there were so many incidents like this and so many that I couldn't include in the book because after a while, it was
Right.
like, oh, this terrifying thing happened and that terrifying thing. And you have to sort of pare it down and hope the reader imagines that all of it was
Yeah,
terrifying.
and totally get like, with, you're not saying, oh my gosh, they were losing their minds, but they must have been losing their minds.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of reading between the line. And I also feel like I want to ask, because of all this, is it a difficult picture book? How did you think about the children that would be reading it, and who would be explaining this kind of stuff to them, and how they would handle it?
That was a challenge.
Mhm.
And I haven't read it to kids yet. This is the first time reading it in public. So yeah, I'm ready for that question. What happened to the dogs? This is Thermes, and that's kind of a hard thing to deal with. I mean, I do address it in the back matter, which is where
Yes.
you could put, the harder facts about something.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's nonfiction, so you can't really, not address it. I mean, this is what happened and it was awful,
Mhm.
but.
Only one person ever forgave him.
Oh, yeah,
It was Chippy.
Mr., yeah.
Yes.
I
Mr.
forget the sailor's
Mr.
name, right,
He was the stowaway,
yes.
the guy who stowed away
What's his name?
and adopted the cat.
Mrs. Chip.
No,
Mrs.
it's the carpenter.
Mrs. Chip.
This is Chippy. What?
He's the carpenter.
The carpenter.
He's
Yeah.
the one who had.
Yes. Yeah, I can't remember. Mrs. Chippy's in the book too.
Yes,
Yeah, this
Wait,
is-
so he didn't forgive Tom for the animals?
no, he didn't this sailor, crew member didn't forgive, Shackleton for putting his cat down.
Oh,
So, pretty smart.
He had his cat down.
Yeah, he had to put his cat down.
The biggest cat lover in history, actually.
I mean, it's hard, like you wanna, these are exciting stories to tell, but the truth is they were pretty brutal in a lot of ways too, so.
It had to be. Yeah. Your words are so carefully chosen that you just don't, you know what happened without being told right over your head with that, they cannot care for the dogs any longer.
Yeah.
And then the ice can break your heart. I must have read that over 5 times when I read it.
Oh.
It's just really, yeah. It's,
Yeah, it's hard, and I think if a young child is not ready for the truth behind that,
Mhm.
they're maybe just gonna skim over it hopefully, and kids who are older will wanna know a little bit more detail about
Right.
about it.
Yep.
But,
Yeah.
that's the thing, it's nonfiction, you have to tell what happened, and
Mhm.
there are ways to sort of smooth it over.
Yeah.
And save the heavy duty stuff for.
I really
Yeah.
appreciated your respect for them. Yeah, I mean, just that you're respecting the reader and the child who's being read to very much by letting that be. But you're not shying away from any of it. And
Yeah,
that's
well, you
really-
can't, I mean, this story you
Yeah.
can't, because they don't return home with the dogs and the ponies, so what happened to them,
Right.
It's,
Well,
Yeah,
and
but-
Scott too, and and all of this is everything, just warming somebody's feet. This, the other thing, we're talking about what you didn't put in the words. But to me, the negative space in this book is really fantastic. This page started it off with me where it's kind of detailed and talking about the Discovery expedition and who was on it and what's going on. And then we just have this chasm.
Mm.
you know, crap and crevasse, yeah, and somebody falling down it, and you just don't have any words. And it ends with the ice, dot, 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 takes your breath away. And there's 3 or 4 times in this book where you just have an almost blank page, and each one is really evocative of a different emotion. I mean, there's wonder, and then there's another one. Just bear with me. You know, he's walking away from everybody to go off and do something brave as usual. And he's completely alone. And that's it. And you just feel that. So he's gone from wonder to being like on his own, having to depend upon himself. And then a big whoosh. Yes. Well, this is great at evoking the space and just like how far was it they had to go across. It's just where you put lots of words and where you just like, you know, like this page in comparison, you know, this and this and this is more like a typical comic. But then, you know, suddenly, and now by now, you know, dot, 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 something's coming in this huge moment of, you know, now it's how they're gonna make it through this, you know. Your graphic understanding.
Thank you.
This is just not something that I see in a lot of picture books, this understanding of the page turn and then the willingness to drop out and not have anything.
Yeah, that's hard for me because I'm a detail person. I like stuffing pages with lots and lots
Yeah.
of detail, but I don't know, it was just the way the story played out, and also in having, because I had 56 pages, so I had to fit 3 full voyages into there. So
Yeah.
some of it is sort of like cinematic technique, you know, how to speed time up and slow it down just to get the drama going. Yeah, I do think about this as a design more than an illustration. Sometimes my background is in design,
Yeah.
so like that helps a lot, I think, because you're designing, you know, how you're reading how you're moving the reader visually through the book itself, and yeah, with the page turns and.
This is why I think this book is kind of an award style. Because you give you got such huge emotions and you're giving it room to breathe. You're giving your reader time to absorb all of those things and kind of go. Not, you know, showing them completely. I mean, this is a terrible moment.
Yeah.
You know, it's scary. And also gorgeous, you know, a great wave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say, despite the hard parts of the story, it was a really fun one to paint because I just, at that point, the words and the story are
Yeah.
and you're painting landscapes, and it's very, you lose yourself in the pictures, I think, or I did when I was, you know.
You always do, don't you?
Yeah,
Lose yourself in the pictures.
yeah, and
Yeah.
at that point, you know, the words are pretty much set, you're just editing, but you're just diving into the painting, and I do forget how to talk about it at that point, because it's all visual.
This page also, this one that's just the moon shining down the mountain and they show up at night. And it just begs the question, well, why did they wait till morning for something? And, you know, they have to go right now. Why do they have to go right now? Didn't they just sail 800 miles? And, you know, it just really, and yet you say nothing. There's nothing. You know, so you figured out yourself where we are in the story at this point. Yeah. And then the map, exactly when you need it to see what's going on. And will you just talk about this page? Because this is so
This
great.
was fun to do.
Climbing over the mountains.
Yeah, I mean, they had
Yes.
36 hours, and so it was day and night, and they couldn't stop. And at one point, they did actually roll up their ropes and sit
Yeah.
on them, and because they were running out of time, and night was coming, so they had to get down this mountain again, and they just said, we're gonna go for it. So they sat on the ropes and flew down at like 65 miles an hour and over a crevasse and didn't crash into the glacier below. So they survived it miraculously. But you know, that takes a lot of words to explain that. So it's easier to just put it in the picture and trust that the
Just
reader
show
will
it.
figure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there were countless. I mean, you know, and I don't mention it at all, but there's a waterfall at the end here. They had to sort of wade through this waterfall, and so they were freezing cold on top of everything else. And
they were falling asleep.
yeah,
They were falling asleep and they could only,
and half
Shackleton would say, okay, you've got 5 minutes, you've got an hour to sleep, you're gonna stop and sleep for an hour, and then he would wake them up after 5 minutes, and tell them the hour was up.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember it just, I mean, I'm a maximalist, I can't hear this way, but I remember the part of the story where they talk about how they all, you know how you keep a sense of how many people you're with, when you're off doing something.
Mhm.
And there were 3 of them, but they all kept envisioning a 4th. And
Yeah.
later they talked about it and we just said, who was it? Who was with them? But they all were like, yeah, I kept looking around for the other guy. Well,
Yeah.
so did I. I did that too. And, too much for a picture book, but still like,
Did they name the other guy?
no, they didn't know who it was. They were all just like, the angel Gabriel, who knows, right? I don't
It
know.
was a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
That kind of
That
got
was
through it.
something like that.
There's so many anecdotes to all of this, and that's the thing, you can't fit everything in a picture book, but I always hope with these kind of books that it inspires somebody to go and read more about them, and because there are so many stories,
Yeah.
and stories of survival in all the different voyages
Yeah.
that took place. So yeah.
Well, I just think that you make him so memorable that I think kids will come back to him later. Oh, I know who that is. Like a cool guy. Yeah. So I have to ask about the dogs
Yeah.
because he's got a dog at the beginning.
Yeah.
Looks like a lurcher. It's
The dogs are,
whatever.
yeah, the
Just
dogs,
whatever they are.
yeah.
Mhm.
Some of the dogs are just, it's sort of a invented scene a little bit, or
Sure.
not invented, but yeah. Because he was a dog lover. He
Yes.
just put the horses in the background in a happier
Yeah.
setting too.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the main themes,
Do you have a dog?
I did, but
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So it just seemed to me that you got to his heart through the dogs. Yeah. And I think the kids would say that too. I think the puppy part.
well, that's the one, thing that comes through in the pictures of him, is he's always with the dogs, caring for the ponies. His dog had puppies. and,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the puppy picture breaks your heart.
Can you show that around? Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Jennifer, do you feel that the book is aged appropriately? Because the publisher says ages 4 to 8. And I really think it runs on the top side of that.
Probably upper side of it, yeah. I don't, I don't really have much say in the age that they put on it, so,
So, yeah,
yeah.
but there's so many of your books that are, I don't mean to say ageless, but I sell to adults who love reading them to kids. So yes, it could be 4 years old read to with a certain, interest, but clearly reading it on your own at 8 o'clock, right? 8 years old is within the bounds too. I mean, it
Yeah.
depends.
It really depends, and it depends. My mom always likes to say, I love your books. She's my mom. But because, I can look at the pictures with a young child and pick out animals and pick out details. And, so yeah, you can read books on a lot of different levels. I think, yeah, definitely. I think they're skewed older because the subject matter is not always easy. But
That's the other question.
yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I don't think about it a whole lot when I'm writing it because I'm just trying to tell a good story, and I'm writing more like, what am I curious about? And I always kind of take a leap of faith and figure if I'm interested in it and really curious about it, a reader will be too. And if I'm excited about it, because when you're writing something, if it's just so boring.
But on the flip side of it, you always want to do honor to the book by selling it to the right population.
Right.
But you also, I found with Manhattan, I sold it for Christmas presents to families.
Yeah, I know.
Because it was the entire history of the island of Manhattan. In this case, you've got a breadth of people that you, yes, of course, can sell to families, but then you can also interest children. And it's got a lot more, there's different ages that are going to appreciate different aspects of it, I think, personally.
I've heard them called sophisticated picture books.
Sophisticated.
Ones that you could use in middle school as well as the younger kids.
Right. Right.
It's
I
true,
don't-
but I also would hand it to my grandson and say, see what you make of this. Whether they could read it or not. They
How old
can
is
read well, I would have handed it to them at 4 and 5, and I found that out when I had my own grandchildren, that there were a lot of books that are around that I didn't really want to read them. Or I knew they wouldn't like, or something, and this, I would just say, well, look at the pictures and say, why is it sad, what's going on, or what's happening here. And I feel that I could trust a child with this book to figure something out, for sure. Really wonderful.
I mean, I also sort of believe that picture books are for all ages. I mean, I know people say, oh, my kid's too old for picture books. Oh, no, they're not.
No, they're not.
Mm-mm.
Because I've seen them used very effectively for prompt writing in high schools.
Oh, yeah, sure,
You
yeah.
know, I mean,
And that
really.
was for the most, simple, simply designed, few words. I mean, there's so much depth behind that.
When I opened my store for the first time 11 years ago over Molten Java, it was the teen center that came because they dropped a pallet of books out in the driveway without telling me that no one was going to be there to help me pick. I mean, what did I know? So I called the teen center, and all these young boys came over, between 14 and 18, and helped me carry a pallet of books upstairs. Where they parked themselves was right in front of the picture book section because they offered to help shelve it. And they go, I remember Goodnight Moon. I remember, and they started reading them to each other. And I hear these big kids, some of them were football players, reading this age group. So you're absolutely right, because there's something that gets into the youngness of our hearts that we remember when, whether it was Pooh or Peter Rabbit or, whatever it was, there's always that special book or two or three or four that are part of that memory that runs deep. So yeah, it really is ageless.
That's great.
Yes.
Sandy.
Is it okay to ask a question? now?
Sure.
I really like hearing about your decisions and how you incorporated the pictures as moving the story forward without words. My question is, I'd always heard that when you write a book, that you don't necessarily get to illustrate it, that they pick who the illustrator is going to be. How does that work if you're not the illustrator?
For just an author, you would submit your story to a publisher and they pick that. But I write my own stories, so I kind of present them as, here's the picture book mock-up and here's the words.
Oh, so when you went to them with the pictures and everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this case, I sent them a pitch, and they knew my work already, but yeah, I just sort of evolved into doing, I started out as a map illustrator and then sort of got into picture books and then started writing. So I thought of myself secondarily as a writer, but now it's all sort of.
Did you ever illustrate without writing?
I do, yeah. And in fact, I'm working on one right now. So, which is nice because the last few books have been both writing and illustrating, and it's a lot of work, but it's very relaxing to just illustrate somebody else's words too. It's a different mindset, because you want to give respect to that author's work, but it is also a partnership too. So it's just using a different part of your brain to solve
do
a
it for
creative
somebody
problem.
else, yeah.
Yeah, but it's fun. It's
Can I just ask one more question
sure.
about your meeting? What did you do?
I work in watercolor and colored pencil, and then I use salt in this book through the watercolor to give to make an icy effect. So,
Not just on the cover, like where else?
well, there's the one that takes this book away, and then the lettering on all the not on the cover.
Shells.
The lettering on the
Oh, the names of the ships.
yeah the I call them chapter heads, but
Oh, yeah.
that's all
Oh,
salt
cool.
too. So
Really?
yeah. So,
That's fun. Yeah.
I think you said that he's from a big family.
mhm.
And then when he went home, you get the feeling like he was just alone and that he didn't tell anybody any of his experiences. And I'm wondering, do we know why? Did he not connect with his family again and
Well,
tell them what he'd been doing?
He, I actually addressed that in the afterword. When he went back home, it was the 1920s, and Britain was, Ireland was fighting for its freedom from England, basically. So, you know, because he had spent his whole career working for the British Navy, it was kind of like not really something he wanted to make public. So nobody really knows why he didn't talk about it too much, but
Even as an older person?
not by all accounts. Not by all accounts. I mean, I think his wife and his daughters probably
So
knew.
he did have a family.
Yes, yeah, and that's all in the afterward too, because he went home and married and opened the South Pole Inn, which is actually an inn on the Diggle Peninsula that you can visit.
Well, it's beautiful, and your Manhattan book I love. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Other questions? Kids have questions?
Oh, yes. So this is a fairly heavy subject matter. Do you find yourself, I worry about some of the writers that do a lot of heavier subject matter nonfiction. Do you find yourself needing to step away because of emotional reasons, or does it not necessarily affect you?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, and this one, for whatever reason, not as difficult, I think, but I have another book coming out in August, called A Place Called America, and that is just
August.
it's coming out in August, yeah, and that's a nonfiction history.
Do this.
I know, I worked a lot last year. I'm taking a vacation for a while. Yeah, but yeah, and that one delves into, you know, real history, and that was a tough one. I mean, I leaned a lot on my, you know, writer friends and my editor and my agent quite a bit, because it's, you know, but, you know, I feel compelled to tell these stories, and I feel like, you know, we need to know the truth about things and the facts behind things. And I think also that we don't give kids enough credit. Like, they want to know the real thing, you know? And it's how you know, it's how you present it to them, and hopefully there are adults enough who can explain, you know, and sort of help guide them through it. But I don't think the kids, you know, if they're not ready for something, I think they tend to skim over it, and then go back to it when they are ready for it. So yeah, it's a tricky balance, and yeah, I need to write about rainbows and bunnies. Yeah, yeah. Genuinely. Oh, hey, yes.
So how long did it take you to research and then put the book together?
Oh, great question. So usually I've been working pretty quickly, but this book actually took about 6 years off and on. I wasn't working on it the entire time, but if it's a normal book, I'll usually research for about a year and 2 years, and then there's another close to a year of doing the artwork and editing back and forth. So, I mean, you can say probably 3 or 4 years, and that's probably pretty fast too. Sometimes, because sometimes you do need to take a mental break and let everything just sort of, you know, think about it and approach your story in another way. So, good question.
Any other questions from anybody?
I have one. Do you have your manuscript all done before you start the art, or are you doing both at the same time?
Both at the same time.
Oh,
Yes.
how does that work?
Well, that's why I'm scattered everywhere. That's why. It's, you know, sometimes a story comes to you in pictures and not in the words. And so I'll just kind of, if I'm stuck on one, I'll work on the other, and sort of go back and forth. And at a certain point, you do have to turn in a draft to your editor.
Is it linear for you?
No, not at all. It's all over the place. I mean, it's funny because the voice of the writing, I kept thinking, I mean, I love languages and accents, and I kept telling the story myself with my fake Irish accent, and it just sort of came out better that way, and it was easier to just sort of like get the, you know. the
Did you get your
flow.
husband to read it for you?
No, no.
Bizarre.
So, yeah, it's a very mixed up process.
Did the cats help?
The cats help all the time. They do.
Was there, knowing that you don't go in a specific order, was there like an illustration that you were procrastinating to work on?
Not really procrastinating. It's sort of the opposite, like the whoosh. I knew I wanted to do that from close to the beginning. And sometimes you get like an anchor illustration in your head and you can sort of build the rest of the story around that. So yeah, and the way I work when I'm drawing it is like I do tons and tons of little sketches called thumbnails. So you can do lots of different variations over and over again. And then I work sort of not on the computer as much, but I'll take, I'll print out my little pictures and I'll make copies of them and I'll cut them out and I'll just make a jigsaw puzzle out of them just to sort of get the flow. And then I'll put things up on my wall and just sort of sit and stare and tell people I am working, but there's a lot of staring out the window and just sort of, you know, when it starts to play like a movie in my head, then I feel like it's working. But then also you trust your team. I mean, this was the first time working with a new art director and she came back with sketch suggestions that were really, really good and actually cutting out a few things. And I thought they were brilliant suggestions because they were so simple, but it just made the flow, you know, even better. And it amazes me how much you can cut and still tell the story. So, because I like to throw everything in, so yeah.
The kitchen since.
No, yeah. Yes.
Does your editor give you specific dates on when you're supposed to be finished with something?
They do. Yes. And I laugh. Yeah.
How do you manage your time with that and not
It's,
get stressed?
I get stressed. I do get stressed. Yeah, you know, I don't know. I came from a magazine background where like if you didn't finish at a certain point, the magazine would not go to print. So
Oh,
I'm used to working on quick deadlines and you know, you just plug away at it. But I mean, with Manhattan, I needed a lot of extra time. And with the America book I just finished, I needed extra time. And apparently not everybody adheres to deadlines as much. So there's a lot of wiggle room there, but I kind of get like, I have to meet it, but you know, you can only do so much and only put in so many hours a day. So
Were there nights where you had to basically do all-nighters because of
not since college. You know what? I'm not really a night person, so I would rather get up at 4 in the morning and start doing art over coffee if I'm really, really pressed for time. This book, for whatever reason, I was a little bit late, but it didn't stress me out as much. Sometimes the art doesn't go well and you think, you know, I need to redo this piece. And sometimes it's actually better to take a day off because you give your eyes a rest and I'll come back to a piece and think, oh, it's okay. It's fine. So.
well, I look at your titles and you've obviously done the artwork in the fonts and so forth. Do you do that on a separate sheet that is laid over or?
The art director does the type.
Oh, so it is typeset.
Yes,
Okay.
this cover is typeset. So,
Okay.
so I'll send in a dummy that leaves room for the text where it goes. And, you know, they'll typeset it for me and then I can adjust the illustration around it. And
Wow.
so
Okay.
like when you're designing, when you're drawing the page, you kind of have to consider the text, an element of the illustration. You know, where is it going to go? You have to leave room for it. So,
Okay.
Can I ask a kind of nerdy writing question?
yeah.
It's history, so how come you wrote a present tense?
It came out that way. I didn't
Yeah.
think too much about it. And then I realized that it was, and then I liked it that way because it just felt everything in the book is so tension driven and
Yeah,
it just
yes.
made it feel more immediate for me. But I really didn't, it just kind of came out that way. And then like you have happy accidents along the way and you know, you realize that it's working this way, so.
It totally works.
I noticed that too, as you
Yeah.
were reading it, I was thinking about that, I was like, wait a minute, this is nonfiction. But I loved the voice, and that's what made it was very engaging to have that present tense. It's about like a story.
Yeah. Thank you.
Not like a story, so, yeah.
I took a writing class and they told me to always write in the present tense. And if you're writing about the past, start the first sentence in the past and then jump into the present because the reader wants to be there with the people in the book. They don't want to be 200 years ago. They want to be now. They want to experience it as they're reading it, they're experiencing it. So it's better to write in the present tense in today's age.
I think it really depends on the book too, you know, some things, some techniques work for some books and not for others. I mean, some books, you know, you write in poetry or you write in, you know, some are better, some stories are better told that way. It's like what's the best way to serve the story. So there are like rules and parameters, but they're kind of made to be broken depending on too. So
Yeah, it just felt like how you would tell the story. You know, this is they get to the island and then they have to leave and climb over the other mountains and go around. You know, it's all happening right now as you're telling. You know, it's like, you did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's another question.
I was interested in what you're saying about the typesetting. As I look at this page,
Mhm.
is the type part of the artwork or is that typeset?
yes, that's hand lettered. I do a lot of hand lettering in the maps.
Okay, so
So-
like even like this label Antarctica.
Yeah, that's all drawn into the art.
Okay.
Yeah.
interesting.
And then do you paint to size, like with the little pictures, little, or are they all big size?
This one I did to size. Yeah, sometimes when if you're working on a computer, it's different, but sometimes you'll work like 10% above size, but it depends. Like with the big trim books like Manhattan, that was completely 100% of size, just because it would take forever to do otherwise. It's all really what you're comfortable with.
Anybody else? Ladies, what a great afternoon. Thank you so much.